John was a man with two very different lives, like two separate books on a shelf. In one book, he was Sarah's loving husband. They lived in a cozy house with a garden, shared quiet dinners, and talked about their dreams for the future. Sarah believed John was her whole world, and he made sure she felt that way. He remembered her favorite flowers, brought her coffee in bed, and listened to all her stories about her day. Their life together was calm and full of simple joys. But then there was the other book, the one about Lisa. With Lisa, John was exciting and adventurous. They went to lively restaurants, danced in new places, and planned trips to far-off lands. Lisa thought John was a free spirit, always ready for something new and fun. He bought her sparkly gifts and surprised her with spontaneous getaways. Their world was bright and fast-paced, full of laughter and last-minute plans. John was very careful to keep these two lives from ever touching. He had different clothes for each life, different stories, and even different ways of talking. With Sarah, he was steady and dependable. With Lisa, he was daring and unpredictable. He kept two phones, one for Sarah and one for Lisa, always making sure the right phone was hidden when he was with the other person. His mind was like a complicated puzzle, always fitting the right pieces into the right places. He had a whole set of rules for himself. Never use the same credit card twice in a row for both women, always check his car for any clues, and never, ever mix up their names. He felt like a master juggler, keeping two delicate balls in the air, never letting one drop. He truly believed he was good at it, that no one would ever find out. He thought his secret was safe, tucked away where no one could ever see it. Every morning he woke up and planned his day, like a general planning a battle, making sure every move was perfect to keep his two worlds apart. He was so sure of his cleverness, so certain that his double life would remain his own private story. John was a master of his deception, or so he believed. But even the best acts have tiny cracks, and Sarah, his loving wife, was starting to notice them. At first, they were just little whispers in her mind, easy to dismiss. Like the time she saw a second phone tucked deep in John's gym bag. It wasn't his work phone, and it certainly wasn't the phone he kept on his bedside table. When she asked about it, John quickly said it was an old spare. Just in case. Sarah nodded, but a tiny question mark hung in the air. Then came the mysterious calls. Sometimes, John would get a message on his main phone, and his eyes would quickly dart to it before he'd excuse himself, saying it was a work thing he needed to take in the garage. He'd come back a little later, often with a slightly different smell on him, not sweat, but something floral and unfamiliar. Sarah tried to ignore it, telling herself that work was just busy. Another time, while putting away laundry, she found a shirt that smelled faintly of a perfume she didn't wear, a scent that was sweet and summery. It wasn't unpleasant, but it wasn't hers. She held the shirt to her nose again, a frown creasing her brow. John had been on a business trip that week. Could he have picked up the scent from a colleague? She pushed the thought away, but the scent lingered in her mind, an unwelcome guest. Then there were the late nights. John would sometimes arrive home later than usual, explaining he'd been stuck in traffic or working extra hours. He'd be tired, but a little too eager to go straight to bed. Sarah, ever the caring wife, would make him tea, but he'd refuse, saying he just needed sleep. She started to feel a chill creeping in, a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. These small, strange things were like tiny, scattered pieces of a puzzle. Sarah didn't know what picture they formed yet, but she knew they didn't belong to the happy, simple life she thought she had. The whispers in her mind grew a little louder, a little harder to ignore. The tiny cracks in John's careful act were growing wider, letting in a cold draft that settled deep in Sarah's heart. The small, strange things she'd noticed, the hidden phone, the hushed calls, the unfamiliar scent, could no longer be brushed aside. Her initial unease had blossomed into a thorny worry, wrapping around her thoughts and squeezing tight. It wasn't just a fleeting doubt anymore. It was a heavy feeling, like a stone in her stomach. Sarah found herself watching John more closely. Her eyes, once full of trusting affection, now held a hint of quiet observation. When he came home, she'd notice how quickly he put his phone down, face down, on the table. She'd see him check his reflection in the hallway mirror, a quick, almost nervous glance, as if making sure everything was in place. These weren't things she'd ever paid attention to before, But now they stood out, sharp and clear. She started listening too. When John took his work calls in the garage, she'd sometimes pause in the kitchen, pretending to clean, trying to catch snippets of his voice. But his voice was always low, muffled, and the words never quite reached her. This secrecy, this constant need for privacy, felt new and wrong. It was a wall building between them, brick by invisible brick. Her nights became restless. Sleep wouldn't come easily. Her mind replaying every odd moment, every half-truth, every hurried explanation. She would lie awake next to John, listening to his steady breathing, and wonder who he really was. The man she loved, the man she married, seemed to be slipping away, replaced by a stranger with secrets. The happy life they had built together, once so solid, now felt shaky, like a house of cards in a breeze. One evening, as John was getting ready for another late meeting, Sarah looked at him, truly looked at him, and a firm resolve settled in her heart. She couldn't live with this growing cloud of suspicion. She needed to know the truth, whatever it was. She decided then and there that she would stop ignoring the little things. She would pay attention, she would watch, and she would find out what was truly going on. Her worry had turned into a quiet determination. Sarah's resolve was now a sharp edge, cutting through the fog of her doubt. She was no longer just wondering. She was actively looking, her senses heightened. Every movement John made, every word he spoke, was sifted through her new lens of observation. Her opportunity came one rainy Tuesday morning. John was rushing out the door for work, his mind clearly elsewhere. He grabbed his keys, kissed her quickly, and was gone. Later that day, as Sarah was tidying up, she found John's work trousers slung over a chair. Habit made her check the pockets before putting them in the laundry basket. Usually they were empty or held only a loose coin or two. But this time, her fingers brushed against something stiff and crinkly. She pulled it out. It was a small receipt, folded neatly. Her heart gave a little thump. It wasn't a receipt from their usual grocery store, or the hardware shop John sometimes visited, or even his favorite coffee place. This was different. The name at the top read, "The Golden Spoon Cafe." She stared at it. "The Golden Spoon Cafe?" she whispered to herself. She had never heard of it. They lived in a town where she knew almost every eatery, especially the popular ones. This place was a complete mystery. Her eyes scanned the rest of the receipt. It showed a small order, 2 coffees and a pastry. Not a big lunch, but clearly for 2 people. The date was last Friday, the same day John had claimed he was working late on a big project. The time stamped on it was early afternoon. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she held the flimsy piece of paper. This wasn't a work meeting. John didn't meet colleagues for coffee and pastries in a place she'd never heard of, especially not in the middle of a late project. The receipt was so small, so innocent-looking, yet it felt like a heavy stone, dropping into the quiet pond of her worries and sending ripples everywhere. It was a solid piece of evidence, not just a feeling or a fleeting scent. This wasn't just a tiny crack anymore. It was a clear signpost pointing to a secret she hadn't yet fully understood. She folded the receipt carefully and tucked it into her own pocket. This was her first real clue, a tangible thread in the tangled knot of John's hidden life. The receipt from the Golden Spoon Cafe was a small piece of paper, but it weighed heavily in Sarah's hand. It was no longer just a feeling, it was a fact. This concrete clue ignited a new fire in her, turning her worry into a quiet, focused investigation. She couldn't ask John about it directly, not yet. She needed more information, a clearer picture before she confronted him. Her first step was simple. She sat down at her computer, the crumpled receipt clutched in her hand, and typed "The Golden Spoon Cafe" into the search bar. A few clicks later, a small, charming-looking cafe popped up on the screen. It wasn't in their usual part of town, but in a different neighborhood, about a 20-minute drive away, closer to where John sometimes had, quote, business meetings. The cafe looked cozy, with outdoor seating and brightly colored flowers. A pit formed in Sarah's stomach. It looked like a perfect spot for a secret rendezvous. Next, she turned her attention to the mysterious calls. She couldn't access John's phones, but she could observe. She paid attention to the times he received these calls, noticing they often came in the late afternoon or early evening, just before he was supposed to be heading home from work. She also noted the way his face changed, a quick shift from his usual calm expression to one of slight urgency or secrecy. He would always take these calls privately, in the garage or stepping outside, his voice hushed. Sarah also thought about the second phone she'd seen. She remembered it was a different brand, a different color. She tried to recall if she had seen it again. No. It seemed to have vanished. John was clearly careful about it. She realized he must be very good at hiding things, which only made her more determined. She started paying attention to John's credit card statements when they arrived, looking for any unfamiliar charges or patterns. It was a painstaking process, but she was driven by a need to understand. Each small piece of information, whether about the cafe or the calls, felt like adding a new thread to a tapestry she was trying to weave, hoping it would reveal the true pattern of John's hidden life. The quiet investigation was underway, and Sarah felt a strange mix of fear and resolve. She was digging, slowly but surely, into the secrets John thought he had buried so well. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, but Sarah was carefully picking them up, one by one. The Golden Spoon Cafe receipt was a solid anchor, telling her a specific place. Her observations of John's calls and his late arrivals provided the patterns. She now knew where he was sometimes, and Minshura Haskalabi was being secretive. It was time to connect the dots and figure out his secret schedule. Sarah started keeping a small, hidden notebook. In it, she wrote down every instance of a mysterious call John received, noting the time and if he went into the garage. She cross-referenced these with his excuses for being late or his business trips. She noticed a pattern. Many of the calls happened on Thursdays and Fridays, often leading to him coming home later or claiming to be working on a big project that extended into the evening. The cafe was located in a neighborhood she rarely visited, a busy area with many offices and shops, but also some quieter residential streets. She wondered if John had a reason to be there for work, but his company's main office was on the other side of town. The cafe receipt was dated for a Friday afternoon. John often had late meetings on Fridays. This wasn't a coincidence. She remembered John mentioning a new client he was trying to win over, someone who lived or worked on the west side. The Golden Spoon Cafe was definitely on the west side. Was this his cover? She doubted it. John was too good at keeping his work and personal lives separate. This felt different. Sarah decided to do a little reconnaissance. One afternoon, when John was supposedly at work, she drove to the neighborhood of the Golden Spoon Cafe. She drove past it slowly, noting its location on a bustling corner. She also noticed several apartment buildings nearby and a small, fancy-looking park. Her mind raced. Was he meeting someone there? Was he visiting someone there? She then thought about the second phone. If he had a secret life, he would need a way to communicate that couldn't be traced back to his home or work. The mystery calls and the second phone were almost certainly linked to this other life. Sarah now had a general area, the west side, and a specific type of location, a cafe, possibly linked to a residential area. She felt a growing certainty that John wasn't just working late. He was spending time with someone in a different part of town, building a life she knew nothing about. The threads were beginning to tighten, forming a clear, unsettling picture. Sarah had gathered enough clues to feel a chilling certainty. The pattern of calls, the cafe location, the late nights, it all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. There was only one way to know for sure. The next Thursday, when John said he had an, quote, important client dinner, Sarah put her plan into action. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest, a mix of dread and fierce determination. She waited until John had left, giving him a 10-minute head start. Then, she got into her car, trying to act calm as she drove out of their driveway. She kept a safe distance, making sure not to be seen as John's car moved through the evening traffic. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The journey felt endless, each mile bringing her closer to a truth she both feared and desperately needed to know. John didn't head towards his office building or any of the usual business districts. Instead, he drove directly towards the West Side neighborhood, the very one where the Golden Spoon Cafe was located. Sarah's breath hitched. As he turned onto a familiar street, one lined with those apartment buildings she had noticed, her stomach dropped. He parked his car a few blocks away from the cafe, on a side street. Sarah parked further down, out of sight, and watched. She saw John get out of his car, adjust his jacket, and then, a moment later, a woman appeared from one of the apartment buildings. Sarah had never seen her before. She was tall, with bright, flowing hair and a vibrant smile. And John, Neuer John, lit up as he saw her. He walked towards her, his stride lighter, his smile wider than Sarah had seen in months. They met with a warmth that felt like a punch to Sarah's gut. John took the woman's hand, a tender gesture that tore at Sarah's heart. He leaned in, whispered something, and the woman, Lisa, laughed, a sound that carried faintly across the street. It was undeniable. The way he looked at her, the ease between them, the casual touch, it was clear. This was not a business partner. This was his other life, alive and breathing right in front of her. A wave of cold shock washed over Sarah, followed by a searing pain. Her fears, the whispers, the tiny cracks, they had all been true. John had a secret life, and the woman beside him was part of it. The world tilted on its axis. She watched them walk away, hand in hand, towards the Golden Spoon Cafe, their laughter fading into the evening air. Her heart felt shattered, but in the devastation, a new, steely resolve began to form. She had seen it with her own eyes. Her worst nightmare was real. The drive home was a blur of tears and disbelief. Sarah's heart felt like a fragile glass vase, shattered into countless pieces. The pain was so sharp, so overwhelming, it took her breath away. Sadness, deep and raw, washed over her. A tsunami of grief for the life she thought she had, for the man she thought she knew. But swirling beneath the sadness was a burning, furious anger. How could he? How could John, her husband, lie to her so completely, for so long? She stumbled into the house, the familiar comfort of their home now feeling like a cruel joke. Every picture of them together, every shared memory, felt tainted, fake. She sank onto the couch, hugging her knees, letting the tears flow freely. For a long time, she just sat there, lost in the storm of her feelings. The images of John and Lisa, laughing and holding hands, replayed in her mind, each time twisting the knife in her heart. But as the initial wave of despair slowly began to recede, something else started to surface. A flicker of something strong, something resilient. Sarah had always been a quiet person, but she was also steady and determined. She had uncovered this truth, painful as it was, and that took courage. She realized she couldn't stay in this shattered state forever. John's betrayal had broken her heart, but it wouldn't break her spirit. She took a deep, shaky breath. "No," she whispered to the empty room. "No, I won't let him do this to me." The anger, instead of consuming her, began to harden into resolve. She deserved better. She deserved the truth, and she deserved to decide her own future, one not built on a foundation of lies. Wiping her eyes, Sarah sat up straighter. The tears still came, but now they were mixed with a fierce determination. She had to be strong. She had to think clearly. This wasn't just about John anymore. It was about her. What did she want? What would she do now? The path ahead was unclear and daunting, but she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't let this destroy her. She would pick up the pieces, not to put their old life back together, but to build a new one, stronger and truer. She needed a plan, and she would find one. The raw pain still lingered, a dull ache in Sarah's chest, but her mind was now clear, sharp, and focused. She knew she couldn't let John continue his charade. The time for quiet observation was over. It was time for confrontation. But this wasn't going to be a tearful outburst. Sarah wanted to be calm, collected, and armed with undeniable proof. She wanted to strip away his lies, piece by careful piece. Her first step was to choose the right moment. She decided against confronting him immediately when he came home from his, quote, client dinner. She needed him to be relaxed, to think he had gotten away with it one more time. The weekend, perhaps, when they were usually alone together, would be best. She thought about how he would react. Would he deny it? Lie more? Try to turn it around on her? She needed to be ready for anything. Next, she gathered her evidence. She retrieved the receipt from the Golden Spoon Cafe, placing it on her bedside table where she wouldn't forget it. She thought about the scent of unfamiliar perfume, the mysterious calls, the hidden phone, and the patterns of his late nights. She wouldn't just accuse him. She would present the facts, one after another, leaving him no room to escape. She practiced what she would say, not out loud, but in her head. She would start calmly, asking him about his day, letting him tell his usual stories. Then, she would introduce the first clue, watching his face for any changes. She wouldn't yell or cry, though her heart ached to do both. She would be firm, her voice steady. She wanted him to understand the depth of his betrayal, not just for her, but for the life they had built. Sarah also thought about what she wanted from this conversation. Was it an apology, an explanation, or was it simply to expose the truth and then decide her next steps? She knew an apology might not be enough. The trust was shattered. But she needed him to admit it, to see the pain he had caused. She wanted him to face the consequences of his actions. This conversation wouldn't be easy, but Sarah was ready. She was no longer the naive wife. She was a woman who had been deeply hurt, but was now standing strong, ready to reclaim her life from the shadows of his lies. The weekend arrived, heavy with unspoken tension. Sarah had spent the days leading up to it steeling her heart, rehearsing her words, and preparing for the inevitable storm. John, oblivious, seemed unusually cheerful, humming as he made coffee Saturday morning. This carefree demeanor only solidified Sarah's resolve. They were sitting at the kitchen table, a place usually filled with comfortable silence or easy chatter. Sarah took a deep breath. "John," she began, her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "We need to talk." John looked up from his newspaper, a slight frown touching his brow. "Everything all right, honey?" he asked, his usual gentle tone. Sarah didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, crumpled receipt. She laid it flat on the table between them. "Do you recognize this, John?" He glanced at it, and for a split second his face remained calm. Then, as his eyes focused on the Golden Spoon Cafe, a flicker of something, surprise, then panic, crossed his features. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It's just a coffee receipt," he stammered, trying to sound casual, but his voice was already losing its usual smooth quality. "From a meeting a while back." Sarah met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "Really? 2 coffees and a pastry? On a Friday afternoon, when you told me you were working late on a big project?" She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "And in a cafe I've never heard of? On the west side of town." John's face was draining of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a deer caught in headlights. The master juggler had dropped a ball, and it had shattered. "And what about your second phone, John?" Sarah continued, her voice gaining a quiet strength. "The one in your gym bag? Or the late-night calls you take in the garage? And the perfume on your shirts that isn't mine?" She watched him intently, seeing the careful mask he wore crumble away, revealing raw shock and guilt. Finally, she delivered the final blow, her voice breaking just a little despite her efforts. "I followed you on Thursday, John. I saw you with her." "Lisa." The name hung in the air, a bell tolling the end of their illusion. John flinched as if struck. His eyes widened, his mouth agape. All pretense vanished. He was utterly, completely shocked, caught in the harsh light of his exposed lies. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only with the sound of Sarah's own ragged breathing and the undeniable truth. The silence in the kitchen was thick and heavy, broken only by the frantic beat of Sarah's heart. John, his face ashen, finally found his voice, a choked whisper. Sarah, I can explain. He reached out a hand as if to touch her, but she recoiled, pulling back as if from a burning flame. Explain what, John? She asked, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. Explain the lies? Explain the other life? Explain how you could look me in the eye every day and pretend? The questions tumbled out, sharp and painful. He started to talk, a torrent of words pouring out, rushed and desperate. I'm so sorry, Sarah. It was a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't know how it happened. He looked at her with pleading eyes, his usual calm demeanor completely shattered. Please, just let me explain. I can fix this. I can make it right. But Sarah couldn't listen. Each word he spoke, each desperate apology felt hollow, like empty promises bouncing off the thick wall of her pain. The image of him with Lisa, so happy and carefree, was burned into her mind, erasing any possibility of believing him. His explanations felt like more lies, more attempts to smooth things over, to keep his comfortable life intact. Don't, she said, holding up a hand to stop him, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't say anything else. I don't want to hear it. Her heart ached, not just from his betrayal, but from the realization that the man she loved was capable of such deceit. The man who stood before her, pleading and broken, was a stranger. He tried again, his voice cracking. But Sarah, our life, everything we built was a lie, she interrupted, her voice finally rising, filled with a raw anguish she could no longer hide. You built a different life, John, one I knew nothing about. How can you expect me to listen to anything you say now? The weight of his betrayal was too heavy, too fresh. Every explanation felt like an insult, every apology a further wound. She needed space, silence, time away from his deceitful words. She stood up from the table, her chair scraping loudly across the floor, and walked away, leaving John alone in the wreckage of his exposed secret. His pleas faded behind her, unheard, unheeded. She was too hurt to listen, too broken to believe. After leaving John speechless in the kitchen, Sarah retreated to the quiet sanctuary of their bedroom, a room that now felt alien and cold. The raw, searing pain of his betrayal was still a fresh wound, but the tears had stopped. In their place was a clarity, a hard, sharp edge of understanding. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking not about John's lies, but about her own truth. The future she had always imagined, the one filled with John, their shared dreams and simple joys, was gone. It had evaporated with his confessions, leaving behind a vast, empty space. But instead of feeling lost, Sarah felt a strange sense of empowerment. She had faced the deepest fear in her heart, and she had survived. She thought about what she truly wanted, not what she used to want with John, but what she wanted, as Sarah, on her own. She wanted honesty, she wanted peace. She wanted a life where she didn't have to question every late night, or every strange receipt. She realized that the love she thought they shared had been built on a foundation of sand, always shifting, always ready to crumble. The idea of staying with John, of trying to fix things, felt impossible. How could she ever trust him again? How could she ever look at him without seeing Lisa, without hearing the echo of his lies? The answer was simple. She couldn't. Her heart, though broken, was firm. She would not live a life shadowed by his double dealings. Sarah sat up, her movements deliberate. She would not be a victim. She would be a survivor. She decided that her future would be one without John's complicated, dishonest life. It meant a difficult road ahead, undoubtedly filled with more pain and uncertainty. But it also meant freedom. Freedom from suspicion, freedom from the constant ache of doubt. She would reclaim her home, her finances, and most importantly, her sense of self. It was a daunting prospect, but the thought of living another day under John's deception was even more terrifying. Sarah took a deep breath, picturing a future where she was whole again, a future she would build with her own strength, one brick at a time, free from the heavy weight of John's secrets. Her decision was made. With her decision made, Sarah wasted no time. The days that followed were a whirlwind of painful but necessary actions. She spoke to a lawyer, changed the locks, and started the process of separating her life from John's. Each step was a small victory, against the sorrow and anger that still simmered beneath the surface. She didn't seek revenge. She sought peace and a fresh start. John tried to contact her, sending messages and making calls, but Sarah remained firm. She knew that any conversation would only open old wounds and blur the clear path she had chosen. She needed to heal, and that meant cutting ties cleanly. The familiar objects in their house, once symbols of their shared life, were now simply things to be sorted. She packed away her belongings, each item a memory, but now viewed through the lens of her newfound strength. Slowly, carefully, Sarah began to build her new chapter. She reconnected with old friends she had drifted away from, finding comfort and laughter in their company. She started a new hobby, painting, allowing her emotions to flow onto the canvas in vibrant colors. Her garden, which had been a shared passion with John, became solely hers, a place where she could cultivate beauty and growth, just as she was doing for herself. There were still moments of profound sadness, quiet evenings when the loneliness felt overwhelming, but these moments were fewer and farther between. She found strength in her own resilience, in the courage it took to uncover the truth, and the bravery to walk away from a life built on lies. She realized that while John's betrayal had caused immense pain, it had also opened her eyes to her own strength. Sarah looked in the mirror one morning, truly seeing herself. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. Her eyes, though still holding traces of past hurt, now sparkled with a renewed sense of purpose. She had navigated the storm, and she had emerged, not unscathed, but whole. She was ready for whatever came next, a new chapter full of unknowns, but also full of possibility, built on her own terms, with honesty as its foundation. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace her future, free from the shadow of John's double life.